Hello, once again. Welcome back to the Heavy Subjects podcast. I'm Ruben, that's Reagan, and today we are continuing our odyssey into all things thrash metal. So, what are we doing today, Reagan? What are we talking about specifically in the realms of thrash?
We're talking about the big four, the post golden years, you could say, I suppose. Mainly probably the late 90s and the millennia. I feel like
Nice.
that's a good way to transition into what we're doing because the big four have always been quite controversial when it comes to the later stuff, specifically one of them, which we're going to get into.
Oh
Don't worry,
yeah.
viewers.
Oh yeah.
And I feel like that's probably best to start with the biggest one that, well, anyone's going to be expecting, talking about the big four in the later years.
Yeah. I think it's worth as well just kind of setting the scene a bit because I feel like almost more so than any other subgenre, thrash bands are really guilty of trying to ride the coattails of grunge and groove metal. So within the realms of metal, Pantera, probably the biggest band of the 90s. Slipknot, I would argue, overall have a stronger, not stronger, but a more well-known legacy.
Mm,
But they were like right at the end of the 90s where they got massive. And
yeah,
then the
yeah.
2000s onwards, where they were like the biggest metal band in the world, probably. But
Mm,
Pantera, I think, for the most part, were the biggest band of the 90s. They were decidedly groove metal. The
yeah.
biggest, really, the big revolution in the early 90s was, of course, grunge, spearheaded by Nirvana. Grunge was obviously already around for a fair while before then, but when Nevermind came out, specifically the single Smells Like Teen Spirit, just almost overnight, hair metal, which was a big thing at the time, and glam metal was just cast off its throne. Kurt Cobain was unceremoniously just plonked on that throne instead, against his will, really, and just gone, right, there you go. You are now this generation's John Lennon. And so there wasn't so much of an audience for 8 minute long songs with galloping, palm muted riffs and really long solos anymore. What was popular then was more essentially heavily distorted pop, but it had an attitude of the anti-establishment, and ironically, because early thrash was very anti-government and anti-establishment in that way, whereas the grunge sort of scene was anti-establishment in the sense that it was anti the norm for the music industry. So we don't want processed rich rock stars. We want what we perceive as like real, genuine artists.
Mm, yeah, I agree. There's definitely an anti-culture with the pop at the time. We do, like you said, the 80s, there was a lot of commercialized, polished MIDI music. I feel like the early 90s were, especially with places like Sound City, trying to bring that sort of old, sort of raw, more natural sound, and I feel like that became very popular. Um, I suppose with that anti-culture coming in now, there was a weird landscape for music as a whole in the 90s, I felt, because metal was went through so many changes in the 90s. Like
Yeah,
there was so much going on underground. It's like right under the belly of the beast. There was a lot going on in metal at different places, doing different things. The only thing that really, like I said, came to the surface mostly was Pantera. Really, I'll be honest. Like they were at the surface and maybe Groove as well, like Roots and all that. But like under the belly of all the what everyone knew, there was a lot going on. And I know we probably we were touching upon it. Like you think of black metal or the early 90s, or you think of how death metal was turning into brutal death metal or melodic death metal throughout the 90s
yeah,
underground and all that. And then obviously new metal was slowly creeping up as it got towards the 2000s until it exploded.
yeah,
And the weird sort of MIDI bitty incantations going on for the 90s was very weird for metal. There was so many little things going on underneath that was kind of on under the radar, and then it exploded. Then again in 2000s with new metal. So The 90s is a very interesting subject when it comes to metal as a general genre.
Yeah.
You're hearing a lot about it when we mention about metal. However, the 80s was very linear. There was this thrash, and then it expanded into death and you had thrash and doom, and expanding into sort of, I don't know, like we mentioned, doom and all that, and so forth. I mean, I'm getting my words mixed up, but the point is that it was a bit more linear. But in the 90s, it was getting a lot more experimental. Those things going on all over the place.
Yeah, it felt like a combination of things, really, especially with the Big Four, who had spent most of the 80s more or less in metal terms at the top, right? Bands like, you know, well, obviously Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, and Slayer were at the top. And it was like in the 90s, I kind of feel like a lot of them were like trying to keep their place at the top. So it's like, well, we can't just keep doing the same thing. We need to
That's
do
true.
something new. And in some cases, it was unfortunately it was, well, let's just try and be Alice in Chains for a bit. And then it kind of was
Yeah,
just a bit shit.
yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the bands coming into the 90s that were famous in the 80s, like you mentioned so far, was a victim to being having to fit into the new landscape of music at the time, which was
Yeah.
that grunge, more new metal-y sound going into the later 90s. Like most of the big four had the guilty of it, and all these other thrash bands tried doing the same. But some of them did try and keep it the original, and they did well with that, but it wasn't going to get you big at that point. They felt like if you
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
stay big, you have to keep going with the trend, and they felt like they had to do that, so they did. The Black Album being a major factor within all
Well,
of it.
it's it remains to this day. Not only is it Metallica's most successful album, it's if you don't count Back in Black, it's the most successful metal record of all time.
Yeah, that's a good
And
point.
I, I've said on the previous episode, I like it. I think it's a great record. It's not really so much thrash anymore. I think it's got more in common with hard rock and more traditional heavy metal. But I do think it's a great piece of work from start to finish. So
Yeah,
you know,
I think it's good, and when this would be important when we go into talking about Metallica. So I feel like we've established the setting for what's going to happen now for
yeah, yeah,
Metallica. We should talk about Metallica going after the Black and going into
yeah,
load onwards. Um, uh, and like you mentioned, the Black album was the most successful. Because the thing is that Metallica weren't just getting big with these albums. They were a commercial major success from the Black Album, and that was the point where they were at their biggest. And
yeah.
they've never been able to get as big as they were from the Black Album, I feel.
That was
They
when,
were everywhere. There was a point like it wasn't just Metallica as a metal band. They were a popular band in general, and they were
yeah,
on. You saw them alongside of other popular people. Like, they'll be at awards, and they'll be with people like Madonna and stuff. Like really, the biggest artists at the time. They weren't just a big metal band. They were a big band, musical
yeah,
act in general,
definitely.
and every Walmart or HNV, depending if you're American or English or whatever, you be hearing Enter Sandman,
Yeah,
wouldn't you? You'd
everywhere
be
you go.
hearing Nothing Else Matters, and these things were just not. These things were everywhere, just as they were in the charts and on the radio and everything, and they were huge from it. So it doesn't really. It does make sense, sorry, that with things like Load and Reload and Saint Anger going into them, that why they changed the sound to fit more this style, because it's what made the success the biggest. And I feel like since Black Album, they've been trying to somewhat recapture the success of the Black Album. It's just never really happened.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll talk a bit more about that when we get to like their most recent work. But it does feel
Mm,
like everything they do, like post Saint Anger, it feels like they're just trying to either recapture Master of Puppets or the Black Album,
yeah,
and
yeah, exactly.
that's all they ever try and do anymore. But
Yeah, I feel like they
shall
want
we?
to capture the success of the Black Album, but I've noticed in
Yeah,
more
yeah,
recent ones, which I'll get into, that they're trying to recapture that old audience that they had from the 80s. But again, we'll go with that. We'll start with Load anyway.
yeah. So
And
I like in the last episode, I outed myself as a major Black Album apologist. I think it's a fucking great album. I don't care. And I appreciate the argument that they just dumbed down their sound to sell more records. Not true. Blatantly not true. The reason why the Black Album is the style that it is because the album before that, every fucking song goes on for 7, 8, 9 minutes and just has such too many riffs and it's just too complicated. And they were sick of it and they wanted to do something a bit more straightforward.
mm,
And the thing to remember with a lot of bands, especially metal bands, is the style they're currently playing is probably not what they're listening to. You know how Opeth recently have gone to more of a progressive rock style as opposed to death metal, right? Michael wanted to do that since before their first album came out, but he knew they had to do the death metal decade or so first to get to that point. So I think it's worth noting that especially on Load and Reload, especially with James Hetfield, he was looking more into like what music influenced him growing up, what music influenced him, from where he came from and what he was listening to in the early 90s. And I think there's definite influences from bands like Alice in Chains and the 90s output from bands like Corrosion of Conformity, but also just country stuff. He's never been since the mid 90s. He's never been ashamed to say that he fucking loves country. More power to him. And in that spirit of me being a Black Album apologist, I'm also going to say I think Load and Reload are underrated. I think they're perfectly fine albums. I appreciate they're not thrash. They never said they were going to be thrash, so I feel that complaint's a little bit invalid. Here's the thing. I think Load and Reload are much stronger than Death Magnetic or Hardwired or 72 Minutes of Boredom because it's more. I would rather hear them experiment and put out something interesting than try and be the old Metallica and just ruin it. That's my opinion. And I think some of the stuff like is it Mama Said? That's a really great emotional song. I don't care that it isn't at 200 BPM and singing about being trapped in a glacier or something. It's a different sort of emotion. And like with any band, I think people complain about, oh, their new stuff's not as good as the old stuff. Go and listen to the old stuff then. It's still there. It's not like Star Wars where they're just removing it as you knew it. Like, it's still there. You can go on Spotify and listen to Ride the Lightning. It's not going anywhere.
All right.
But no, I think Load and Reload are great. I think they're both, especially both together, I think they'd make a nice little double album package. It's a great journey from start to finish over a surprising amount of styles.
I think it's good that you're mentioning them together because I do feel like Load and Reload are a bit like two sides or heads and tails of the same coin. Let's think of it that way. I feel like I like Reload a little bit better than Load, but that might be because it's more nostalgic to me because I did listen to Reload a lot more when I was younger compared to Load. So there is a bit bias there. I realize that, but personally, I do feel like I preferred that one more. I think though, yeah. How do I describe? I mean, like I do agree with what you're saying. I'm just trying to figure out a way how I would describe this. It does. I'd say it this way, actually. It does interest me when listening to these albums because my thought is, who are they trying to target while making these albums? Like, what's in their mind? Like, what are they thinking? Like, when we make this, we're making this music as we, as we're doing it, who are we targeting? Like, who is going to enjoy this? And that is it. It's very interesting because it's obviously not for the elitist fans, right? Who probably they lost. If not by the Black Album, definitely Load. And then so by the time they get into Reload, they know they're not appealing to any of the elitists anymore. Right? We get that. You think maybe hard rock fans or even maybe country fans, right? Because that's what they're into at that point. But again, it has so many tangents that I don't really buy it at the same time, that idea. So I think to me, it's a self-indulgent albums to me. Of what James and the rest of Metallica wanted for themselves, because they are Metallica and they can do that at this point. They feel no audience was. I feel like there was no audience in their mind when they did this. Therefore, despite the issues of the album, which are after 2 albums, there are issues with them. Personally, as a listener, I just don't feel like it was genuinely in the process of making an album to think about that. It seems genuine. So what I feel like is, I don't really blame them for what they did, but I do feel like listening to it is a downgrade for what I liked in the past. You know, like if I listen to the other albums in the 80s, yeah, it's clearly a fucking downgrade. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah,
But it's
yeah,
genuine, and I can't blame them because they're Metallica. They done so much by this point. Of course, they can just have a fucking self-indulgent album and just get it all out of themselves. They allowed to do that. And I don't think they were thinking about us listening to it while they were making it. They were thinking about what they wanted to do, which they never really had sometimes, especially with the Black Album.
I think that's interesting. I agree with you to a point. I definitely agree that even though I've just basically said I do quite enjoy Load and Reload, compared to like the 80s stuff, they are dog shit. I'm not going to pretend they're not. But I think it's interesting you say they didn't have an audience in mind. I would argue that they in fact did.
Okay.
And it was the case of them going, if you like good music, it shouldn't matter who it's by. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an interesting principle that in some cases works really well. Like when, well, the most infamous example is Radiohead, right? They went from being alternative rock to electronic almost immediately, and a lot of
Yeah.
fans were like, "What?" But over time, people have gone like, "It's not the same as OK Computer, but Kid A is still great music. It just happens to be written by the same people, so does it matter?" Um,
Mm-hmm.
but the one, in some cases, it doesn't work. When Paramore went from, I guess, kind of emo pop punk rock sort of thing. The
Mm-hmm.
classic Paramore sound, so now they sound like Talking Heads. I got to see part of a Paramore show recently in person, and I thought if I didn't recognize Hayley Williams up there, I would never guess this was Paramore. They sound
Yeah.
like Talking Heads. Whether that's a good thing, I don't know, but it's not what I got into Paramore for back about 10, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I think for me as a music fan, I think Load and Reload have enough interesting stuff. And I think it's quality music. I think
I
that's the
see.
important thing. Is they are if they weren't by Metallica, I think they would get a lot more respect. Those two records.
Yeah, I see. I agree. They are good. I can listen to them and enjoy a few of the songs. For every song I might dislike, there's always one I'm going to really like on those albums, right, or
Yeah,
records. Um, I do, like I said, I feel like Reload has a bit more to it. It's a bit more itself. I feel like sometimes Load feels a bit more like it's the back end of the Black Album sometimes. I do get those feelings
mm,
from, that's just why I feel like listening to it sometimes. Not think that's necessarily a bad thing. You can just tell that some of it's kind of bled into it a bit more from it, which it makes sense. It's the album after, so it's not necessarily a criticism. I just feel like Reload had more. It was more itself compared to Load. And like I can go into aspects of the albums that I feel like this that I like and dislike. For example, sorry, my eye went a bit weird. Like I feel like James's vocals are sometimes way over exaggerated on the album, almost to the point like what you're
yeah,
fucking doing, right? Like what are you trying to do doing that, right? I just don't get it. I just don't get that. Um, I thought, but at the same time, like I found the house that Jack built vocally quite good
yeah, yeah,
in itself. Like, yeah, there might have been some songs where it's really stupid and over top, but I think in that he did a really good job. And then not just that it's airy, the interesting topic, the lyrics tackle about this tackle towards addicts and the struggle with sobriety from
yeah,
probably from Hetfield's point of view with his own addictions. It swallows me as it takes me in its fog. That's a really cool lyric, and it's
yeah,
potent and it makes sense, and the way he sings it is good. And I feel like I could go into that song where the pre-chorus depicts the moments when he gives in to his temptations. I think it's just well captured. So I could go into that as much as more into that beat to get the general idea. I think there is points in it that are very well done. So I feel like, for example, what's the song? What's that song called? With no sense of escape. Is that it?
I can't remember. It might have literally. Hang on.
I can't. Oh no, it isn't. I think it's still the same song I'm talking about.
Okay.
I think it's still doing Jack Built. There's a song where there's like a guitar/tour box solo. Is that the same song? I might be
Might
getting
be.
confused.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm getting confused with words here. I might be confusing that with another song from another band, maybe. Anyway, the point I'm making is that I think it is that song, and there's like this. I feel like the rest of the song is great, and then this talk box solo comes in. I'm like, that doesn't need to be in there. It just ruins it. I feel like that's how I felt listening to it. I mean, it's not necessarily bad. You can argue that it's a unique thing, yeah, especially for Metallica. So I'm not saying it's bad. I just felt like it just kind of ruined the song a bit for me listening to it. That's just how I personally felt. So it let me a bit down, that bit. I feel like their first single was interesting because it was Until It Sleeps, their first single on Load.
Yeah, and that must have been really jarring when that came out after like the Black Album.
Yeah, for sure. It's so much different to the previous stuff. I'd say, in one sense, it's quite a courageous choice as a first single, because it's not only it's a foreign body on the album, but the whole band in itself, it's a foreign body. So it was quite a. I can imagine it pulled in attention, despite whether there's negative or positive attention.
So the next album in their discography looms over us like a horrible monolith.
Oh
And
no!
we know it was coming. It's one of those albums we have to acknowledge it exists. But
I was.
getting there, shall we talk a little bit about the state of affairs in the Metallica camp during the late 90s, early 2000s, right?
Yeah, we should.
Arguably the least popular they've ever been in
I was
public
hoping
eye.
to go more into Reload and Load because I didn't want to talk about this album, but I am dragging it on as a bit for the
So
reason.
99 or 2000, they released the single I Disappear from the Mission Impossible
What was
2
that
or
like the
3
last
soundtrack.
song to have Jason Newsted? Was that right, or was that
I think it might be.
was it?
But
I'm not
yeah,
actually sure because I
2000.
know
He
Jason Newsted
left.
was in that one.
Did he leave in 2001? I think.
It was something like that. I can't
I
remember
think
the
that is
exact.
the last recording of Metallica that he's on that got officially released. So
Maybe.
yeah,
Obviously, if we're wrong, let us know.
yeah, totally. That song is shit. It's like when an elitist goes Metallica, it's just James Hetfield going yeah and like wah and Lars's tinny snare. What they mean is they've only heard I Disappear. The
Yeah,
riff is literally Kirk just stamping on his wah and James going, yeah, 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 yeah. And that fucking awful snare.
yeah. No, I
I don't
agree.
understand why they listen to that song and let's make an entire album that sounds like that, but worse.
It was like the calm before the storm,
Oh,
you could
but
say.
here's the thing, it was going to get worse because do you remember this thing that Lars Ulrich did in 2000 that made many people in and outside the music industry, the music industry workers, professionals, and fans alike, all of a sudden overnight went, "We hate Metallica. You're being
Mhm.
dicks."
Yeah, yeah. I see. There was a lot of controversy at the time. I think the band was on the verge. Well, I think it was on the verge of splitting up. I feel at this
Yeah,
point.
totally.
I feel like there's a point of going into the elephant in the room, which is Saint Anger. Everyone, calm down. Um, there was a very pinnacle point on Metallica. It was like I feel like if they didn't do Saint Anger the way they did and kept doing things the way they did before, that band would have stopped at that point.
Yeah,
I
I
do
think
genuinely feel that.
after the Napster controversy and Jason I don't know because I wasn't there. I've never been in Metallica, so I don't know exactly what happened.
Hmm.
From what I've heard, Jason just out of nowhere, according to James, feelings had been building up for a while that he wasn't happy being in Metallica anymore. And the way James and Lars will tell you, turned around and just went, "I'm leaving," and they were like, "What?" But his response was like, "Well, you've ignored the way you treated me for nearly 20 years now, and I just feel like shit all the time, and I don't enjoy this." Which is,
Mm.
fair enough, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, like it's all personal decisions and feelings towards it.
Yeah. So
Whether
they had to
they,
find,
oh yeah, go on. Sorry.
sorry, yeah, they had to find a new bassist. James, during the production of the album, went to rehab for alcoholism because his wife basically said, either you quit the drink or I'm divorcing you. You know,
Yeah,
I
big,
think he
big,
made the right decision, of course.
of course.
Yeah, and it was chaos. And the band, if you watch the documentary Some Kind of Monster, which if you haven't seen, I really recommend watching it. It's a miserable watch, but it's a really fascinating look into the inner workings of one of the biggest bands on the planet and at a time of such turmoil, because it feels like half the film is them trying to do anything but work on the album, because that's every time they're in the studio working on the album, it's awful. They just argue the whole time and they just bicker, and the material they put out is just subpar, and they have no qualms about letting each other know that what they're playing is subpar.
Yeah, definitely. And how do I put this? It was kind of like a therapy session for the band. I feel like that's
Yeah,
the entire
yeah,
St. Anger was them resolving their issues. But because they had such a mess going on, the album just reflected that, and it was a mess in itself. Like I don't think in the whole discography of the Big Four there is an album as jarring as St. Anger in any way.
mm,
I
yeah.
I really struggle. Like, and the thing is, you can't just point it down to bad production alone because
It's more than that.
it's more than that. Like, look at Injustice for All. And there's loads of other great albums out there I listen to, I really enjoy with low production because it's written well and a lot of effort gone into it, especially. I'm happy. I mean, let's face it, there's people who love Injustice for All in the Metallica fandom. So like it can't be just because the sound bad production wise, even though the production was dog shit, yes, especially the snare. Right. And I feel like obviously it's like almost a meme now, right? The whole snare thing. We get that, like the Metallica St. Anger snare. It's fucking everywhere. I love it or hate it, and most people obviously hate it. Um, it's one of the things in the album that does stand out, and and that shows you how bad the album is because everything else is so mediocre or jarring or so bland and nothingless that something that
Yeah,
is shit points out because it's still something.
and I think it's worth saying as well, because I know people in my life who really like Saint Anger, and I'm not trying to say that you're wrong or your opinion is wrong. I think, do you know what I would say? If you like Saint Anger, that's really cool because you're doing something that I can't bring myself to do. No, but
Yeah,
if you like it, fair enough. I think it's an interesting piece of art, whether or not it's good. I think it's a very valid piece of art for that band and where they were at the time. And I think in terms of the snare, no, it's not. It's not like. But I think Todd in the Shadows in his Saint Anger Train Records reviews summed up really well. It's like Jar Jar Binks, right, in the Phantom Menace. It's not like removing it would make the film a masterpiece, but it's always
yeah,
there
it's a really good point.
in the
It's like
background being annoying.
the thing is that when I'm listening to it, and it's a very good point. I'm always noticing the bad things, and
Hmm.
because it's something there, and it's like I notice a lyric that's just awful.
My
Like, was
lifestyle
it?
determines my death style.
I was literally going to say that my lifestyle turns my death style. I'm like, James, why are you? What are you talking about? You
Multi-million
sound like
earning musicians.
it's like the epitome of a bit like Crisis, right? He's trying to be cool, but he's just falling flat. Like, Um, and like frantic tick 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 tock, and then the final time he says it in frantic, it sounds like he
Tick
just.
tick tack. It's that really awful, like his voice just starts cracking because he can't do that kind of vocal style.
And also he's just like he's almost breaking down, and like it's just really hard to listen to it. And there's points in it, it's just, oh my god, like why is this existing? Like Purify, it made me like I've never contemplated sticking my head in the oven before while listening to a song. But damn, that blew that out the window, right?
And people will say, like, oh, it's got good riffs. Like, sure, Some Kind of Monster. It's a pretty good riff. The first 2 or 3 times.
Yeah,
That song does not need to be 8 minutes long. But
exactly. And so far.
every flaw with this album, I think, comes from a place of like, it's a crisis, yes, but they needed to go through it. Whether or not the album should have seen the light of day is another thing. I kind of felt that I can imagine them listening to it and just going like, "Ooh," and the label's like, "You got to put it out. You got to go and tour it." And James is just like,
Yeah, literally.
we are never living this down," and they never
That is
have.
so bad. I was gonna say, oh no, it's gone out of my end now. I hate when that happens. Uh, so keeping on the topic of Saint Anger, I know that it's really cool or trendy to hate on it. I feel like there's two trendy moments. There was when it came out, it was really normal and trendy to hate on it,
Yeah,
just completely shit on that album. But then I think because people shat on it so much for so long, it kind of creates sometimes these things create an anti-culture where there was a rise of people coming out to defend the album, right? Like an apologist type of thing.
mm.
And then it started becoming cool to like the album to a degree for some people. They felt like it was going against the grain. And it kind of became cool then to like the album rather than hate it. And now it's kind of become a pineapple on pizza situation where you have two sides bickering about one feeling it's atrocious and the other one thinking it's the best thing sliced bread.
Yeah.
And I'm not, I know I'm sounding like I'm jumping on the bandwagon because it is. I can hit the snare as much as the next person is. And I know that's easy to jump on the bandwagon. But with that, however, it doesn't change the fact that it was a bad fucking idea. And no matter what objectivity you give that or subjectivity, it's still bad as an idea. And I don't think anyone can really defend that, in my opinion.
I think it comes down to like, because to me, I can't listen to it because the snare bothers me so much. It's not just the snare.
I mean,
You
there's
know,
always
the
issues.
songs are terrible, but that's just my opinion. It's not a fact, it's
Mm.
just my opinion. But to me, listening to it, I kind of feel like saying someone who does like it, does that snare not bother you? It's the same thing as some people like certain foods. And if
Yeah,
you hate a specific food and someone else likes it, they can explain it till the cows go home how they enjoy it. But you haven't tried it like this. Well, you need to have it with this then it's good. No, you need to have it like this. And it's like I don't like the taste of it. I put it on my tongue and it tastes like garbage. What do you want me to say? Like I
yeah,
don't choose how it tastes to me. And this is why I think it's a bit of a tangent, but this is why I have a theory that different foods actually physically taste different to different people. Because I feel like saying if that tasted to you how it tastes to me, you wouldn't eat it.
of course, yeah. I think people do interpret sensations differently, and
I think
music.
so in music.
Exactly. And like I said, there are no matter how much you hate something, someone's gonna like it, and no matter how much
Yeah,
you like something, someone's gonna hate it. It's just the rule of life, right? Um, I just don't. I can't. I listen to it, and I just like after one or two songs of that album, I'm like, I can't. Like, I just
I
can't
need to
do
listen
it.
to
I,
anything else. Yeah.
I've tried exposing myself more and more, giving it the benefit of the doubt, and I really have tried for everyone out there who does like this album. I just can't get. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
it's like flogging a dead horse almost, and I can't understand why. So I just basically don't understand why someone likes it. But like you said, it's the same with food. There's certain food I taste and it tastes so bad, and I'm like, how could anyone have that? It is in a way, in
Yeah.
itself, a bit of subjectivity, but
I think a lot of growing
it's,
up is realizing that liking something isn't necessarily a choice. You just like it or you don't. And you can't really explain why. It sets off a chemical reaction in your brain that goes, me like it good. And that is as simple as that, really, I think.
yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? It's kind of well, I mean, that'll be for a different podcast, but like that's a big question on free will in itself. Do you have the choice to
Mm,
like what you like? You may choose to eat it, but do you choose to eat it because you've been determined to like it? Like it's one of those things, right?
but
Obviously, I'm not a philosopher, nor I'm going into libertarian philosophy in any way, but music does have its side like that.
but this is the thing because, like I say, I personally would say that Saint Anger is one of the worst albums ever made.
Yeah,
But the fact that it sparked such intense debate between us, I would also argue it is a completely valid, important piece of art and culture.
yeah, the
Because
cultural
all the
impact
best
of it.
art sparks conversation. I'd rather have something be shit than just okay. Because if it's just
Mm,
okay, what can I do with that?
yeah, because I want to go into this more with the further albums of Metallica because
Yeah,
the thing is that it might be the worst album as a piece of art, but I think the later albums aspects of them are worse, not because it's worse musically. It's just it's not it's you can't talk about it as much. Like the thing about saying anger, it's so shit that it forces your attention.
yeah,
Like people talk about it to this day over and over again because of the cultural impact of how shit it was. However, the ones to come after, which we're going to talk about, kind of are like they're so mediocre and boring. So yeah, it might not be as shit as a listen, but it's way more forgettable and much less talked about.
yeah. I think it depends how you look at it, but I'd argue that the next album, Death Magnetic, is of their last three, it's the most remembered because again, issues with production. It was mastered to be physically louder than anything else, and infamously, the Guitar Hero versions of the songs sound better because
Yeah, I
the
remember that.
waveform isn't just a block.
Yeah, I remember that, and I mean, I wasn't specifically pointing at Death Magnetic when I say this, but
Sure.
we'll go into that further. But it'd be interesting to, start Death Magnetic now after, yeah, we can all agree it's a step up from Saint Anger, right?
Yeah.
We, you know, and I
Um,
did like some of the guitar work. Like, I'm not gonna completely bash it. Like, some of the guitar work was fine. You can hear more rooted thrash influences going on. But at the same time, it does fall flat. Like I'm just gonna say it. Like it's like you bought Ride the Lightning from Wish, right?
no, I totally agree. I think Death Magnetic. I think okay. So All Nightmare Long, fantastic song. I really like that song. That's probably the best like, modern Metallica song.
It's got
Um,
potential as a song. I would say that.
the first half of The Day That Never Comes is really cool, and I really like the lyrics, and I really like James's vocals on that song. The second half is bollocks. Like you say, it's just Ride the Lightning from Wish. And I think the drums, the mixing on this album is all over the fucking place. But the
Mm.
drums, I think on that specific song, The Day That Never Comes, that really pretty clean guitar intro, and when the snare comes in, that it's so offensively loud, and it just
Yeah.
ruins the song. It's so bad. I don't know what they were thinking.
Yeah,
I
the production's a big issue. Like I said, it's not the only issue because, like I said, if the production's the only issue, it can still be a good album, which you mentioned.
yeah.
I do really feel that. I like that All Nightmare Long had potential, but I just felt like the chorus was, well, we know it's essentially a leftover of Saint Anger, which again, it kind of shows in there. But again, the other parts of the song are really good in itself too.
Mm.
I mean, there was another edition of the Lovecraft mythos coming in. Again, I like the idea, but I just think again it kind of did a similar thing with Saint Anger where it was trying to advertise itself as the old Metallica's back, but it isn't. That's the
Yeah.
thing, right? That's what it's trying. That's what they're trying to say. It's like kind of like other bands are doing this still. Like every, I mean, how many times has Slipknot said with a new album, "Oh, it's just like Iowa," and it's like,
Oh,
it's just like
oh,
Iowa. Stop it.
yeah.
It's the same thing with Metallica. It isn't Master of Puppets.
No.
Stop it.
I feel like this is why I think Load and Reload are actually better than Death Magnetic. Reload, in my opinion, is the last like good album Metallica did that I would happily go out and buy and have it on vinyl. Because I'd rather see Metallica do something experimental but good than try and do old Metallica but fail. And that's how I think about Death Magnetic and Hardwired to Self Destruct and 72 hours, because that's how long that album feels. Uh,
Yeah, I agree. And it felt like it was trying to return to the roots, but then kind of like stopped halfway down the road of doing so.
yeah.
It's like if it's like I've been here before, but it's not the same as it was, if that makes sense. Like this, it's like that sort of deja vu. It's like deja vu, the album.
Yeah.
I feel like the older stuff always felt new when I first heard it. This doesn't. And I feel like again, it's just going to carry on a trend now when we go into the later albums. Because I'll be honest, I can shit on this album a lot more than Magnetic. I mean, yeah, I agree. It's not as fucking bad as Saint Anger, fine, but
Yeah.
it's a lot more fucking less. It's at the same time, it's something more blander about it to me.
Yeah.
Like like
Definitely.
it's not so shit because Saint Anger's so shit. It keeps my attention by how shit it is,
Yeah.
at least. And again, it goes even gets worse when we get to the next two. If we're gonna probably briefly mention Hardwire and 72 Seasons, though we haven't fully
Mm.
listened. I had actually listened to 72 Seasons when it came out, just out of curiosity. And I remember listening to Hardwire when it came out, but again, that was 2016, so there's no fucking way I'm gonna remember all of them songs. I'll probably remember 72 Seasons more because it's more recent. Um, what if I have to give you an opinion on the latest two? Because we're going to kind of put that into one category. I know the
Sure.
two separate albums, but just kind of end it off. We'll talk about those two. What do you feel about them? What you
So,
know?
Hardwired, what I've heard is fine. I quite like Moth into Flame. Um, that's the only one I can really remember, to be honest. It's all right, but I'd rather just put on like Ride the Lightning or Master of Puppets or Kill 'Em All.
Yeah. Mm.
72 seasons. If it hasn't been made clear in the podcast so far, I thought was arse. It's the worst thing they've done since Saint Anger. It's so
I
boring, and the
say yeah.
egos of certain people, Kirk, just make it seem worse.
Yeah, I know. I
I don't
agree.
know what it is, but Kirk Hammett has become such a dick recently.
Yeah, there's a we have to talk about this. I feel like 72 seasons come into it. We have to talk about
Yeah.
the solos and 72 seasons. They're fucking awful. I don't care what Ken says about this, right? He made an article in an argument because someone did a redo of the solo on top, but more
Yeah.
more intricately. And his argument was, well, all these people want to use all these sweeps or complicated scales. Why can't you just use a pentatonic? Pentatonics are just as good, and the sometimes simple is better. And the thing is, I don't think that's a bad argument. It's pentatonics are amazing scales. There's a reason they're always
Yeah.
being used. And again, a solo doesn't have to be complicated to be good. I also
Yep.
agree. but it doesn't change the fact that your solos are dog shit. Like there are solos that use the pentatonic scale that are a million times better than anything you've done in the 72 seasons, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is that it doesn't feel like you really thought about the solos. What you've done is you got the pentatonic in E because the song was in E, and just floated on top of whatever the fuck came to your head and left it. You never thought about it. Now, compare this to one of your older solos. I think Kurt's best solo of all time, though it's preferenced, is Ride the Lightning solo. I think that's a fantastic solo.
It's a
And
very good solo. Yeah.
what makes his old solos fantastic is not just the complication of the solo, but the fact that he thought about exactly what the guitars are doing in the background and complemented them. Each part of the solo had personality, had you could remember it, and it went with the background. He's like he put effort into exactly what the other guys were doing and complemented them.
Yeah.
But he didn't do that. He just went, "Oh, okay, blah, 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 there you go," and that's it. It really fucking shows, and like every solo just feels like a mess. Yeah, it's in key, but you have to be more in key to be good, right? And
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
come on, as someone, I understand it's not easy to have a solo, but Kirk Hammett is, one of the greatest guitarists of all time in terms of metal, and so many people look up to him, and it's like he's just slapping them back in the face.
Yeah, there's nothing more annoying than you go to someone with a genuine critique and or advice, and they just go, "Well, no,
Yeah,
I'm not doing anything wrong. You're being mean." And
yeah,
it's
no,
just
I
like
agree.
he's the thing is that he's got to the point now where he can afford. He can literally. He's got the money to afford to not be a good guitarist, and he's got the money where he can be a dick. And who's going to fire him? He's already got the millions. It doesn't matter now.
Yeah.
He can do. He can do what he wants, and
Mm.
it just really annoys me. And this is why I think a band like Judas Priest. I don't know if you heard their brand new album, but
I've heard a song or
um,
two.
it's really good. But basically, Rob Halford was saying, in our band, it's a democracy. If one person's unhappy, we're all unhappy, and we have to compromise, and we have to think rather than just have an 8-minute guitar solo. We think, well, would that make sense in the song?
Mm.
I could do a really high scream like in Painkiller here, but would that make the song better, or am I just wanking myself off?
Yeah,
And I
keeping
think
you
that's the difference
engaged.
between them and a band like Metallica. Metallica are
Mm.
too. They've gotten too big, I think.
Yeah, and I'm going to be honest. Like when they first released Lux Eternal, my opinion is I actually don't dislike Lux Eternal. I think in
It's
itself,
fine. Yeah.
it's fine as a song. I even learned it on guitar just out of fun, and it's fun to play. Most of it. The only critique I have most in that song is that it's the solo. It's really bland and boring. And again, you could have done something way better with it, right? But the rest of the song I can kind of get on with. I'll be honest. Yeah, it's not as good as For Whom the Bell Tolls or Master of Puppets. Fine, but I can listen to it and enjoy it. Right, I'll admit that. But it's just, it's not like I'll put it this way: if any other band, that especially a small band that released that song, it wouldn't have got nowhere near as much attention
Yeah.
as
Yeah, definitely.
if it wasn't. But because it's Metallica, it did. It's as simple as that. Because they're that
The
big.
thing is, and this is a compliment to the producers that I've worked with before. When I've gone away to record with a specific producer I've got in mind, this isn't me ragging on him. This is me saying he's a professional and there's a reason he's good at his job. If you came in with that attitude of like, I'm not doing anything wrong, he would tell you to shut the fuck up and fuck off.
Yeah, no,
And
you will.
rightly so. That's how a good producer should work. A good producer should call you out on your bullshit. And I feel like a producer isn't going to do that to Metallica because they're Metallica. That's just my opinion. I wasn't there in the sessions when it was recorded, obviously, but that's what it sounds like happened.
Yeah, I feel like Metallica massively went that way because
Yeah.
they think they can. And the thing is yeah, you have to be called out. I'd rather someone tell me that's not a good idea, try this,
Or
because I
even
want
just
to
that
improve.
sloppy, do it again.
Yeah, don't settle for second rate either. Like
Yeah,
when I've learned that if you ever recording a song or writing a song and you think, I don't know, it's good enough, don't think like that. You have to be
yeah,
happy with it. Never think the word's good enough. Because if it's good enough, that indicates to me that it can be better. And when you're
it could always be
releasing
better.
into the world, you want to be as happy as you can with it. And
Yep.
that's okay because there's nothing wrong with that. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying my music's the best in the world. Trust me, I look back at some of my records I've released so far, and I thought, oh, I don't know that or some of the things there, and I cringe a bit at it. And don't get me wrong, I understand that I'm only on my own as one band with not many producers or people behind me, so of course it's not going to be perfect, right? I admit that, but I'm willing to at least you know, feel like my record is okay to be released, and at least I feel I'm okay to have criticism. I always tell people, "What do you think of this song? Is there anything I can change? Is there anything I can do better?"
Mm.
And I'll listen to it, and I would take it on. I would never ever see it as a criticism, unless you're just being blatantly insulting, like, "Oh, it's shit." That's it. Like that's
I
not really
just
a criticism.
yeah, like I just think as a creative person, we're both creative people. I think it's so important to surround yourself with people who aren't just going to go, "Oh, that's really good."
Mm.
The fuck am I supposed to do with that? It's really good. Like one, that's such a terrible B-tech criticism, and two, when people just blindly go really vague, "Oh, it's really good, yeah, oh yeah, it's cool," they're probably lying. They're probably just saying it because they know you personally. They just want to make you feel better.
I
That's
feel
just my opinion.
myself. They're going off tangent a bit because we'll go back on, but I do feel that I feel like if I want an actual proper analysis or proper critique to make things better, I'll go to a person who knows that about that type of thing.
Mm.
I do ask random people as well, but I feel like that's more from the perspective of a audience member. Like what you're going to get from a producer is going to be a lot different to what you get from a friend who just likes music.
Yeah, yeah,
So you have to kind of like think, if I want to be critiqued on something, I'm going to go to someone who knows what they're talking about. I'm not going to, but at the same time, I'm going to get a general reaction from public because I want to know a general reaction to my music when it
yeah,
comes
yeah.
out. So if I feel like this seems, so for example, I will show people a few of my songs and I feel like this seems to get a bit more reaction in my audience than this one. So that one's probably more likely to going to be a single because people seem to like it more. Like I'll listen to that. But if I want actual critique of what I should do better, I try and listen more to people who are professionals and producers and so forth. Though I will still take on other people as well, depending. I'll just go to the professionals more often. That's
I
just
tell
how
you
I feel.
what a good trick is if you're trying to get a genuine reaction from someone from something you've recorded. Don't tell them it's by you. Say, "Oh, a mate of mine did this. What do you think?" And if they go, "That's not very good," at least you know they're being honest. Or they
That's
might
actually
go,
a
"Oh,
really
it's
good
amazing,"
idea.
and then you can just be like, "Yeah, no."
I feel like my issue is that some people already know my music and they go, "That's you, isn't it?" I'm like, "Yeah."
Yeah, yeah,
Sometimes it's easy, especially with my vocals. Everyone's like, "Yeah, that's you screaming." I'm like, yeah. Anyway, either way, I think we should move on to away from Metallica. I feel like that was the big one.
yes, yes,
I
absolutely.
feel like the other ones aren't going to be as big, but we'll go into them anyway. Well, we would like to go after Metallica. What would you feel would be better so far?
Shall we? Because I've got some things I want to say about Megadeth, to be honest.
Okay, let's do Megadeth.
Um, so we kind of touched briefly on Countdown to Extinction. I think it's of all the kind of the big four, like post 80s output, it's probably the best album by any of them. Because while it
Hmm.
does, it's condensed down slightly their sound. It's a bit more accessible, a bit more of a straightforward thing. It's a lot closer to thrash than anything Metallica have done post and Justice for All. It
Hmm.
still feels like it's a thrash album, you know. And to be fair, it's not like Countdown to Extinction. Um, what's the song called? Symphony of Destruction. It's not like that's that much different to something like Peace Sells. Peace Sells was quite an accessible rocking song when it came out.
Yeah.
So Symphony of Destruction is more it's like it's that kind of style really. Um I think it's a great album from start to finish, like any good album should be. I think it's good. And then, have you heard Euthanasia that came out after that?
Yeah, yeah, I know Euthanasia. I actually was one of the first Megadeth albums I got into when I first
Oh
got
wow.
into Megadeth. It's because Train of Consequences. I remember Tout Le Monde, and all that. You know,
Oh, of
the
course,
classics.
yeah. Tula Mon is a huge hit for Megadeth.
Yeah, I know. I understand that it's different to what he did before. However, I do enjoy the album. I'm just going to put it
Yeah.
out there for anyone. And I think the album cover, though fucking weird, it always stuck in my mind. I can never forget the babies being hanged on the fucking on the
On the
watching line.
clothesline, not actually being hanged.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's
Hanged
more
on
like a
the
Cannibal
clothesline,
Corpse cover.
being like hang by their feet, just to, yeah,
Yeah,
nothing, no,
being
no
hung
baby
out to dry.
during the production of this album. Okay, hopefully. Anyway, no, I mean, I get it. Like, it's not their best album, fine. I mean, I'm not saying it isn't, but I still feel like it's got a place in my heart, and it will
Yeah,
always have a place in my heart. And I do enjoy some of the songs that they stick in my head, man. I can't argue. So I'll be like a hippie there, but I agree.
it's a pretty good song. I mean, Addicted to Chaos is a banger. I wish they still played it live. They never do.
Yeah, and I mean, like Countdown to Extinction. If you want to go back to that, I mean, like, you can, yeah, you can see the sort of more commercial aspects of Metallica influence in the album at the time, because obviously it was this like after the Black album. But I think in itself, it still holds well. Both of the albums, you know, Sympathy of Destruction is probably, if not one of them, if not the most biggest song they've ever had. I think
Yeah.
like their first song I heard of theirs was Sympathy of Destruction, you know.
Yep. Same.
So, and I think that's the same, like I said, the same for a lot of people. So, but then obviously things got more. I mean, I'll be honest. I'm gonna be honest. After Euthanasia, the only one I really know is Endgame. Like the other ones I've heard randomly in passing, but I've never really properly listened. I'm just gonna put this out, so my
So
fatigue in this area is very
yeah,
limited. So I feel like you should take this on more. However, when we get to Endgame, it'll be interesting to talk about that.
yeah, yeah. So the one after Euthanasia, am I missing one when I go to Risk? Well,
Uh,
Cryptic Right.
I,
That one's all right, but it's a bit more
hmm,
forgettable. Risk was notably at the time people said like this is the worst album we've ever heard by a member of the Big Four at the
yeah,
time.
at the time, yeah, at the time.
But, but yeah, I never thought I'd say this, but I agree with something that David Ellefson said. Slimy, disgusting David Ellefson. Ooh. But no,
Like,
he said in his book, which I have read. I read it before the event. I should point out.
I
He
don't
said,
actually know what happened there, I'll be honest, but we don't worry about it.
"Yeah, you don't want to know." So Risk comes out and he goes, "It's I think it's a good album. It's just not a very good Megadeth album." And I agree. I think it's fine. After that, they did The World Needs a Hero, which is again them kind of going back to the 80s roots. It's all right. It's pretty good. It's a lot better than anything Metallica have done in the last 20 years.
Yeah, fair. I mean, I don't know if I know any of the bands. I recognize the name. I mean, not bands, I need the songs, but I don't recognize. I
Yeah.
recognize the name a little bit. I think I remember the cover being a bit gory.
Yeah. Skipping ahead a bit, Super Collider was received incredibly poorly. I haven't heard it, so I don't know how bad it is.
System Collider.
Dystopia was
Is that
received very
Super Collider? Is that Super Collider?
yeah, Super Collider.
Ah.
Um, Dystopia was received really well. Their new stuff's pretty good. But let's talk about Endgame. What did you think about that album?
Oh, I mean, I really enjoyed it. I mean, I feel like I'm gonna be. I don't know if this is controversial or not. I'm not sure what the people say about this album, but I actually think "The Right to Go Insane" is probably one of my favorite Megadeth songs. I think that's an amazing song. I love
Interesting.
it. It's something
So
about that song I just really get on with. But at the same time, yeah, it's a peace out. No, by any stretch of the means. No, it's not going to be as high as something like that. But I wasn't really expecting it to meet up with that expectation because I know that's hard to meet anyway. Or Rust in Peace. However, in itself, as an album on its own, I can listen and really enjoy it.
I think like because the two tracks, This Day We Fight and Head Crusher, I really love Head Crusher.
Head Crush is really good, actually.
They were among the first Megadeth songs I ever heard because they were on. There was a boss battle at the end of Guitar Hero. I think it was Guitar Hero 6, Warriors of Rock, where the boss battle is just play 3 Megadeth songs in a row. That's it. And it was those two, and it was Holy Wars. But yeah, Head Crusher is such a good song.
Yeah,
Although I would say the hardest part of letting go, Sealed with a Kiss, is pretty bad.
yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's one. Like, there was a few songs in the album that I thought I don't hate it, but I feel like, you know.
Take it or leave
But
it. Yeah.
there's still songs in the album I'm like, oh, this is really good. You know what I mean? Like, so I say, like, it's like a piece sales where it's gold all the way through. You know what I mean?
Every
But
song is brilliant.
at the same time, there's a few songs in this. Like I said, The Right to Go Insane is probably one of my favorite Megadeth songs. Like, I will be honest. But so it's probably Head Crusher. It's probably up there as well. Maybe not my favorite, but you can definitely put it on top. It's like definitely up there.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like though they've had some of the moments, I feel like they kind of stayed true to themselves a little bit more than Metallica, more for sure. And I feel like that's the same with all of them, though, in all fairness, not just, sorry, I can't get my words out. Not just Megadeth on their own. I feel like Metallica's the only one that kind of swerved off into the completely weird world.
Yeah. I think with Megadeth, whenever they bring out something new, you know what you're getting. When they announced the new album, The Sick, The Dying, and The Dead, when they released the single, it came out, and I looked at the picture and I went, I wonder what this is going to sound like. Headphones on. Yep, sounds like Megadeth.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not what they were, but at the same time, it sounds like Megadeth, and it's fine. Someone will pop out in the car or whatever. I wouldn't say it'll turn it off or anything like that, and I say, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and when I saw Megadeth last year, they played a couple of new ones and they're fine.
Yeah, they work. They fit
Yeah.
within their own general sound. So that's just anyway taking Megadeth. But however, the heyday was that sort of period of '86 to
Yeah.
probably about 1990, maybe 92 if you want to count like Symphony of Destruction stuff.
Yeah, I would say like the 3 albums that at the very top for me would be Peace Sells, Rust in Peace, and Countdown to Extinction. Those
Yeah,
are my
yeah, I
3
agree.
albums by them.
Maybe Euthanasia too for nostalgic reasons for myself, but I
Sure.
understand some people don't think that's up there either, so I get it. Not criticizing. Um, I feel like Slayer would be good to go into now because Slayer had some interesting moments, like when they had that punk phase, for example. That's a bit interesting. Not
Yeah,
necessarily against it, just a bit random.
yeah, it's weird. I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't really listened to much past Seasons in the Abyss.
Yeah, it's fair.
I've heard World Painted Blood, which we're going
Yes.
to talk about, and I've heard Repentless, the last album.
Yeah, Repentless is good. I feel like the main two to talk about we will pay blood and Repentless.
Hmm.
Maybe Divine. Is that Divine Intervention? The other
Yes.
one? I
Yeah.
think actually might be good to start that because that was kind of the point where the music was changing around them. So I was on 94, that was, I think, Divine Intervention. So however, I do have an admired I do admire that album a bit because it's a bit though it's not as good as some of the albums, don't get me wrong. But it's a very anti culture album, I think. Because with grunge at the time being so big, I remember at the time where grunge was out of nowhere and it became huge and everyone was into it. Instead of striving towards that trendy aspect at the time, like Megadeth and Metallica was, they just went heavier. They just went, okay, let's just be heavier instead. Then let's do the fucking opposite to what everyone else is doing, and then just went do the same sound, but just make it heavier and refuse to sound like anyone else but ourselves, but Slayer. And I thought that, I mean, like I said, I mean, is it Rain and Blood? No, but I admire that they did that with that album. Granted, they did take more divergence later on, especially with things like God Hates Us All and stuff. So you can argue that was the idea of that was short lived, but at the time, I could respect it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
But
I've heard pieces of God Hates Us All. I
what's that
do
like?
think I was going to say I've heard bits and pieces of the album God Hates Us All. I've not listened to the entire thing. I
Okay,
think Disciple is genuinely one of their best ever songs.
no, that's good. Disciple
Um,
is the. I mean, a lot of people refer to Disciple. I think it's a great song, and even Bloodline, I can really enjoy the song Bloodline and stuff. So yeah, you can. It's not. It's not like what they used to. It's definitely going away a bit more from the Thrash, but it still sounds like Slayer, and I kind of
yeah,
like that. So yeah, like I said, they did go into more. They tried to. They eventually gave in to the culture, but I feel like even then they still kind of kept themselves up a bit. And even going into Well Painted Blood. Um, I mean, there is a burden for bands, as you know, with when they have a rep made with both intensity and innovation, because I feel like that's what Slayer had, especially during the
yeah,
80s. So I try not to hold it in that mind when listening to these albums. I don't try and think I expect Rain in Blood. You know what I mean? And I feel like for all the big four, actually, I'm not just gonna single out Slayer for that one. But I do feel like World Painted in Blood is probably one of their best albums or better albums post millennia
yeah, yeah, sure.
for sure. Uh, like the self title's great. I mean, nothing wrong with it. But at the same time, it feels like it's definitely a callback to Raining Blood. It's like it's not quite Raining Blood. Like it's not to that level. But I feel like they're trying to give that a callback to that, like the eerie intro. But I just felt like the intro is not quite as well executed as Raining Blood. So yeah, I could argue it's not down, but without that expectation in itself, it's fine. You know?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a fine album. I think I like the track "Hate Worldwide." I think that's a catchy little song.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Snuff ripped, ripped,
yeah,
just
yeah.
ripped my face off. It was great.
I think it's fine. To be honest, I think with Slayer because they have such a kind of when someone goes Slayer, you have a specific sound in mind, and I think let's be honest, it's Rain and Blood, South of Heaven, and Seasons in the Abyss. Those are the three albums.
Yeah, that's the sound.
Then those are the best ones, and then I think below them for me are Show No Mercy, the Haunting the Chapel EP, and the album Hell Awaits, and then the
Mm.
rest of it I can take or leave.
Yeah, I agree with that. And even Repentless, like I like Repentless as an album. It's fine.
I didn't so much. That's interesting.
What's that say?
I didn't like it very much, but that's interesting. I was saying.
Oh well, I like the well. I mean, the first thing that pointed out to me when they first came out was the music videos due to how fucking let's just make the goriest thing possible, right? And then the
Yeah,
most
yeah,
violent
with
thing
Danny Trejo.
possible. Danny Trejo and all that. And I like the way they did have those three videos that kind of all linked together, like almost like a film in a way. Like the whole album may have just
Yeah,
become a movie at that point if they kept going on. And I do agree, it's not a classic. It's never going to be a Rain and Blood ever. It's not a classic like that. It's not going to last. It's not going to have an impact like that at all.
yeah. I
But
mean,
I also thought it would be a shame to skip the album too, just on the basis that it isn't as good as them. You know?
sure. I think that the big thing really that made that album for me was that the songwriting just declined really rapidly. The untimely passing of Jeff Hanneman, their guitarist, who prior to then was kind of really he was the guy behind the scenes making Slayer. He wrote all their best songs.
Yeah, I
He
agree. It was a great
was such
guitarist.
an instrumental part in. They would never have gotten where they were without him, basically. To get into the history of it, for those who don't know, he died from basically his liver shut down, uh,
Mm,
severe alcohol abuse, which was kind of it started when he had a bite from an insect or a spider or something. They're not sure what. He had I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's basically necrotizing fasciitis. I don't think I'm pronouncing that properly, but it basically means it's a condition where you get it from an insect bite, and it basically means your limb decomposes while you're still alive. So it's really
yeah,
fucking horrible. And he was unable. His doctor basically said, "Yeah, you can't play guitar." And he guitar was his whole life. So he was like, "Well, what the fuck else am I gonna do?" So he started drinking really heavily, and it's a really sad story.
And it's really bad.
And it got out of hand, and his liver stopped working, and he died. So it's a really, really sad story, and he is, as Creator would say, one of the fallen brothers of metal.
Yeah, it was a
Um,
very sad day when Jeff died. I remember that happening,
yeah,
and I mean, yeah, I agree. Jeff was a very much a big part of the band and a big voice for the band, even though he never really sang. Um,
yeah.
so you can
But quite the
definitely
thing
see
is,
what happened to the band after he went. I mean, like I said, Gary Holt was a good replacement. You could
he
argue. I
was a
mean,
perfect choice. Yeah,
yeah, Gary did a great job, and I like the fact that he never tried to be Jeff. He knew he wasn't Jeff. He just was Gary, and that was great. I give him that, and I
I
think
saw an
he gave
interview.
Jeff a lot of respect when he came
Yeah,
into the band. So I do appreciate that from a fan's point of view.
yeah, definitely. Like I saw an interview with Gary, and he was saying like people all the time say like, "What was it like getting asked to join fucking Slayer? That must have been such a moment, right? Getting asked to join one of the biggest metal bands on the planet." And he said, "Well, they were already my mates, so it didn't seem like that as big of a deal to me. I'm just doing them a favor." Like,
Yeah, and I can get that. Um,
cool guy.
I think I think we should move away from Slayer now,
Cool.
because we've kind of talked about that through a panelist anyway. Uh, Obviously there's Anthrax. Again, I don't know much of the newer stuff. Like I said, it's a bit here and there.
Mm.
I did listen to Sound of White Noise, which was a bit of a. I think yeah, it's surprisingly melodic. Let's put it that way, but it still hits with some form of relentless nature that Anthrax had. And I do like the song only is a good song. And I did quite like Room for One More or Black Lodge and all that. However, it's nothing compared to like Among the Living or anything like that. Like I get it. Like I understand people hate it. Fine, I get it. Well, I do have I don't really hate the album. I can listen to it and I still enjoy it. I just don't really see it as their best work at the same time. Right? I'm not going to shit on the bill at this simultaneously.
I am. So you know
Yeah,
how
I was gonna. I was expecting this.
yeah, like you know how we were saying a piece of art, the worst thing it can do is just be mid, just be boring. Sound
Yeah,
of White Noise, listening to that all the way through in one sitting. Oh my god, I was so bored. It,
yeah. There's an issue with it.
it
Like,
isn't
like some of the
boring.
songs I can enjoy, but as an album,
Yeah,
it does get a bit monotonous.
so long. Like the thing is, the two things I don't like about it, it's boring to listen to from start to finish, and I just kind of feel like the level of Alice in Chains, like
Yeah,
worship, is unreal. I get that Alice in Chains were, if you argue the big four of grunge were Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, and Soundgarden, Alice in Chains were the closest band in that sphere to metal, I think.
I
They
agree
were
with that.
Jerry Cantrell, not saying that musicians like Kurt Cobain weren't immensely talented, but Jerry Cantrell as a guitarist was very technical for that style of music. It's almost like a bit of a sin to be in a grunge band and be able to shred. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
I see what you
yeah,
mean. No, for
they
sure.
were
For
really
sure.
big in metal. Metallica constantly said they were a massive influence on the direction they went in the 90s. And that's fine. But just trying to sound, it sounded like Anthrax were trying to sound like Alice in Chains because that was what
Yeah,
was
right.
popular, rather than, I'm sure Scott Ian does have nothing but respect for Alice in Chains and Lane Staley and Jerry Cantrell, of course, but that's the way it sounds when I listen to the album.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree. It's very much Alice in Chains feeling, and like I said, I don't dislike it per se, but I get why people do, and I don't think it's nowhere near to what they were. Though going into the later points in Anthrax, like well, she went in worship music, and I only listened to one song from the album, so I'll be honest, I haven't listened to the
Okay.
album. But I feel I was like, oh my god, it sounds like Anthrax. You know what I mean?
It's really good. I would say overall, out of the big four, The best album I think any of them done since the 80s is Countdown to Extinction. The best album they've done in this millennium is Worship Music by Anthrax. I think that's the best one they've done since like the 90s. I've
I
listened to
can't
the entire
argue.
thing and all the bonus tracks. It's really, 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 really good. It's a rare case, like I was saying earlier with the new Judas Priest record, where a legacy band, who have been a legacy band for multiple decades now, put out a new album, even though their heyday is arguably long since past, and it's
Mm.
actually really good.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I'd recommend
I mean,
listening.
I don't know if worship music is going to be my number one, but at the same time, I do think it's probably at least one of the best
Yeah,
from the post millennia, big four. So definitely worth a listen there. And I think like it's not much I'll take and say about facts because I don't know much of the latest stuff. But
yeah.
there's a general rule: there is a decline with the big four in the later years.
In
Overall, I
general,
think people in general, like there was up moments, but I feel like a lot of people just felt like they got mediocre stuff from them in the last sort of 20 years ish, right? 20, 25 years.
yeah.
I feel like that's not just me saying that. I've heard people tell me this, right? That's
Oh,
just
it's
a
a very
general
common assessment. Yeah.
opinion. Yeah. So, but at the same time, there is some gems here and there to listen to. So don't shy away too much just by that idea. However, do expect a lot of mediocrity at the same time.
Yeah, I feel like the classic stuff's still there. Um, band. I think with Metallica, it's important to remember because they're the big ones, right? They're the biggest metal band in the world. I think it's worth noting that when elitists kind of go like listening to Metallica at all is not sort of like you're not allowed to do that. Listening to any Metallica is like false and you're a poser. That's bollocks. Metallica completely deserve every bit of ridicule and mimicry and critique they ever get, but they also deserve all the respect because there's a reason they got so big.
Yeah, I do. I do agree with that. I feel like Metallica influenced so many people in the metal world.
Yeah.
You can't ignore it. You just, no matter how much you want to ignore it, you can't. You can certainly say anger as much as you want, but Metallica will always be one of the most influential bands in existence, and you would never take that away,
And I think
regardless of how they act.
yeah, and I think if you just look at Metallica, the band, as they were in about 85, 86, when they still had Cliff in the band, and when they were doing stuff like Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets, that era of Metallica, they are a contender, I think, for the possibly the greatest metal band of all time. It's either them or early Sabbath or Iron Maiden or Judas Priest for me, like the very, very top, and
Well,
Motorhead.
I can understand that for sure. Like, some of the stuff is amazing. Um, I mean, I don't know if you want to mention any of the bands we mentioned in the second parts, just any albums that come to your head that they should listen to, because I'm not
Yeah.
too familiar myself. But if you want to mention any albums in passing for anyone listening, just to say like there's these albums by other fast bands and the big four that were around in the 80s to still make good albums
Yeah.
in the millennia. And then for the viewers watching, the final part will be for covering the new wave of thrash bands like Eva
Yeah.
and all that stuff.
So, okay, so the one I want to talk about really is Testament. That's the one that's really nagging at my brain. I have to talk about Testament. Um, so some of the night stuff is actually really good. Like the album, for example, Low, I
Mm-hmm.
actually really enjoyed. And it's not necessarily very thrashy anymore, but it's a case of a thrash band, where they adopt the groove metal sound, but they do it really, really well, and it sounds really good. Um,
Mm.
yeah, Low is a fantastic little mention there. And then skipping ahead to 2012, my personal favorite Testament album, Dark Roots of Earth, where they have the legendary drummer Gene Hoglan, who, as
Mm.
anyone with sense knows, he's like the Jesus of metal drumming.
Yeah.
He's been in every fucking band. Um, That album is fantastic. As my favorite ever Testament song, New American Hate, which that's where Chuck Billy started doing more of the harsher, like the really harsh vocals, almost like bordering on death growls, and he does it so well.
I mean, we argue it's in low as well, really.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
There's like, was just the, I mean, what's just the song where he does like full on scream? I can't remember. It's a Dog Faced God, or
I think it is. Yeah.
where he does almost a death scream. I was like, holy shit, Chuck. You know what I mean? Like, that did take me by surprise, like, type of thing. Because, like, I'm thinking not only is he got the punky, thrashy stuff, and then also with the general melodic ballady stuff, but then he's just full of death screaming. Like, his diversity, we have to really admire.
One of their most recent albums, as well. I think it's called Brotherhood of the Snake. That's the one.
I
That's the
haven't heard
tour.
that one.
That album is fantastic as well. Again with Gene Hoglan.
I'll definitely try and give it a listen. Because I've been listening
Yeah.
to so much Thrash. I think after these videos, not going to lie to the audience here, I might give it a bit of a break.
Exodus as well. I was saying in the last one how Exodus consistently have great albums but crap art. With the album Blood In, Blood Out, the artwork is really, really good. And it's a great album as well. And I think that more can be said for the one after that, which is Persona Non Grati. Is that how you pronounce it? It's a Latin phrase, but that
I'm not
artwork.
sure. No, I'm just not sure what it's called. Sorry.
Oh, okay, yeah. But no, the artwork on those albums in particular, they finally fixed the issue. They stopped just having photos of them looking a bit wacky and decided to actually have someone paint something.
Yeah, I think our urban artwork can definitely make an impact. I think more so in the olden days now, but still it makes an impact. Even to this day, 'cause, social medias and all that still need visuals. But I feel like when you were in a time where you went to a shop to look at albums to buy, or sometimes the album cover was very important to grab someone's attention.
So yeah, I think off the top of my head, those are the ones I can think of. Oh, Ironbound by Overkill. That's a great album as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because it's hard to think of any more really. I mean, there's probably more out there, and like I said, the bands we mentioned, they're probably creative as well. But however, we're probably going to mention one of the creator albums in the next one anyway. We did talk about that, but when we talk about new wave, we're going to more focus on the newer bands, not so much the other bands. But like even like the Teutonic stuff kind of kept on quite well into the 2000s. And if anyone out there wants us to delve more into the older bands doing the more modern stuff like that, we are happy to make a new video separately to that. But I think we're just going to give some mentions out and then go into the new wave now because I feel like it's appropriate.
Yeah. I think, yeah. So the new wave will be the next episode, which will be finally the final part of the Thrash.
It will be.
All the Thrash episodes. Because let's face it, Reagan, we love Thrash, but it's like, I don't know, what's a food you love? What's a food we both love, right?
I like fajitas.
Yep, fajitas. I love fajitas. Fajitas are awesome. If you eat fajitas every single day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you get fucking sick of them.
yeah.
It's hard to be sick of Thrash, but I'm feeling a little bit like I'd like to listen to something that isn't Thrash now, please.
Yeah, I see what you mean. No, I'm not, like I said, I love Thrash, but I'm definitely sick of hearing Thrash at the moment because I've listened to I've over 100 albums simultaneously, and it's just like I need a new genre, but I'm gonna go insane.
Yeah, and it's like the thing is with Thrash though is there's still so much more out there. A lot of the bands I haven't really listened to prior to researching for this podcast, and I feel like I'm only still scratching the surface. But
For sure.
You have to balance when you do stuff like this and you're listening. I kind of have to go like, right, the albums that I have to listen to for
yes.
And there's sometimes I just want to listen to music because I like music. I don't feel like listening to Thrash today. So some days I treat myself for a treat. I listen to music that I want to listen to, even though I do love Thrash. but there's a weird kind of blur that happens when you start to treat it a bit like a job. At the
Mm.
same time, I have loved doing this because it's given me an excuse to check out thrash bands I've been meaning to check out for years, but just never have. And now I feel like I have a reason and obligation to. I
Yeah.
found my favorite albums of all time through doing this.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's definitely some things I've discovered doing this that I was very surprised and pleasantly surprised. This for sure with it all. And no, I'll probably definitely gonna take a break from Thrash once all the Thrash episodes are done. I'm definitely gonna go back to it once I've renewed my love. I can keep it, more on a steady consistency rather than like bashing myself on the brains with an album after an album for months.
Yeah. So yeah, so the next part is going to be the new wave, which
Yeah, the
has
new
some
wave.
absolutely incredible albums by some phenomenal bands.
And I think some people are gonna have some nice surprises with the next one with some albums, and definitely like I think we're gonna. I think it's gonna prove that Thrash isn't dead. I
Yeah,
feel
absolutely.
definitely. No matter how many people like to think it is, sometimes, because I've had people tell that to me anyway. We're going to prove otherwise. I feel with the last episode of the Thrash Metal,
Definitely.
until we get to the next one. But anyway, I'm going to head off because I
Yeah,
need to pee
I think it's a good
badly.
one.
So we will see you guys on our final episode of Thrash Metal.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for watching, everyone. All 10 of you. Yeah, cheers. See you soon.